evening was calm, the golden lights of Manila glowing softly against the sky. Inside one of the city's most luxurious hotels, the lobby was alive with activity. Businessmen in suits rushing past, wealthy tourists checking in, and staff moving briskly across the polished marble floor. Everything looked perfect, glamorous, and untouchable. Then, through the tall glass doors, a man walked in. His clothes were simple: a plain white shirt, jeans, and worn sneakers. No bodyguards, no flashy car parked outside, no designer accessories. Just an ordinary man blending into the crowd. That man was Manny Pacquiao. But here's the twist. Without the cameras, without the boxing ring, without the Senate floor, many people didn't recognize him. To the busy hotel staff, he looked like any regular guest, and to some of them maybe even less than that. As Manny approached the reception desk, the staff gave him a quick up and down glance. Their polite smiles disappeared. One whispered to another, "Probably can't even afford a room here." The words weren't meant to be loud, but they carried through the air. A couple standing nearby chuckled. Another guest shook his head, as if to say, "Why is he even here?" Manny remained calm. His face didn't show anger or offense. He simply stood quietly, waiting for his turn. But that silence made the moment heavier. The staff's dismissive tone, the judgment in the whispers, the smirks from onlookers, they all painted a picture too familiar in society, judging someone by appearance, not by character. And right there in that glittering hotel lobby, the first spark of conflict appeared. The audience could feel it. Something was about to unfold, something powerful, because what those staff members didn't know, what those laughing guests couldn't imagine, was that the man they were insulting was not only one of the greatest boxers in history, but also a man whose life story had been built on fighting against disrespect, poverty, and prejudice. The stage was set. The ordinary had just turned extraordinary. And everyone watching, inside the hotel and behind the screen, was left wondering, how would Manny Pacquiao respond to this insult? Have you ever been judged unfairly just because of how you looked? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The receptionist leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking at Manny as if he didn't belong there. The tone of their voice was sharp, almost dismissive. "Sir, this is a 5-star establishment. Our rooms are quite expensive. Are you sure you'd like to inquire?" The words sliced through the atmosphere like a knife. Guests nearby glanced over, some curious, others openly amused. One man in a sleek business suit muttered just loud enough to be heard, "This is what happens when you let anyone walk in off the street." The staff at the desk gave each other knowing looks, as though they were sharing a private joke at Manny's expense. The laughter was subtle but insulting all the same. Still, Manny didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands in front of him and kept his posture relaxed. His eyes scanned the lobby, the chandeliers sparkling above, the velvet sofas, lined neatly across the room, the expensive art on the walls. It was a space meant to impress the wealthy, and right now, it was also a space exposing the arrogance of those who thought wealth was everything. Another staff member approached, whispering just loudly enough, "Security should keep a closer eye. We can't have the wrong type of crowd hanging around here." The judgment continued. Every word, every whisper carried the same poisonous message. "You don't belong here." A woman passing by with her luggage glanced at Manny's sneakers and smirked. "Strange," she murmured to her companion. "Why would anyone dress like that in a place like this?" The companion replied, "Some people dream too big. They don't know their limits." The comments rolled on, building like a storm. Yet, Manny stayed silent. His calmness was almost unsettling. He didn't argue, didn't correct them, didn't reveal his identity. He just stood, patiently, as if weighing the situation. And the audience, when watching this moment unfold, began to feel the tension rise. They knew who Manny was. They knew the truth. But inside that lobby, no one else seemed to. Every second stretched the suspense. Would he reveal himself now? Would he walk out, insulted and humiliated? Or was he waiting for something? The receptionist leaned forward, lowering their voice into a condescending tone. "Sir, if you'd like, I can recommend a more affordable place down the street, something within your range." A couple standing behind Manny chuckled under their breath, shaking their heads. The arrogance of the moment grew almost unbearable. The contrast was stark. The humility of a man who had conquered the boxing world versus the pride of staff who thought a plain shirt and old sneakers meant worthlessness. But Manny didn't waver. He looked up, met the receptionist's eyes, and smiled gently. That smile carried a power the staff couldn't recognize. It wasn't the smile of a man defeated. It was the smile of a man who knew something nobody else in the room did. The conflict was no longer just between Manny and the hotel staff. It was now between arrogance and humility, ignorance and truth, judgment and justice. And the longer Manny stood silently, the stronger the suspense grew. The guests watching started whispering again. But this time the tone had shifted. There was curiosity now, a sense that perhaps the man they were ridiculing wasn't ordinary at all. Something was about to happen. Something that would flip the entire room upside down. Because in just a few minutes, everyone inside that hotel lobby was about to discover the truth about the man they had insulted. Manny adjusted the strap of the small bag on his shoulder and stepped closer to the counter. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and soft, almost too gentle for the grandness of the lobby. "Excuse me?" he said with a polite smile. "Could you tell me more about your rooms? I'd like to know what makes your hotel special." The receptionist blinked, clearly annoyed by the persistence. "Sir, I already told you. The rates here are very high. The cheapest option is still over $100 per night." Manny nodded thoughtfully, as though he was considering the information carefully. "That's fine. But what do you usually offer your guests? What kind of treatment can they expect?" His question hung in the air, and for a moment the receptionist didn't know how to respond. The tone was neither confrontational nor desperate. It was curious, almost as if Manny was asking a deeper question than it sounded. The receptionist finally replied with a forced smile. "Our guests expect exclusivity, privacy. We cater to clients who are accustomed to luxury, people who can afford it." A businessman standing nearby chuckled. "I think what she means is people not like you." His comment drew a few stifled laughs from others waiting in line. Manny glanced at the man, then back at the receptionist. His smile didn't fade. Instead, he leaned slightly forward and asked another question. "Do you believe luxury is only about money? Or is it also about how you treat people, no matter who they are?" The receptionist shifted uncomfortably. "Of course, we treat our guests with respect," they replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. "Even those you don't recognize?" Manny's tone was calm, but his words carried weight. The staff member froze for a second. The audience, watching this story unfold on screen, could feel the tension. Manny wasn't raising his voice, wasn't making a scene. He was simply asking questions that cut straight to the heart. A housekeeper walking past slowed her steps, catching fragments of the conversation. Her eyes widened slightly, recognizing the man at the desk, but she stayed quiet, choosing to observe. Meanwhile, Manny continued, his voice steady and thoughtful. "I'm just curious. Do you ever think about how it feels to be judged? Not by your heart or your character, but by the clothes you wear?" The receptionist swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The silence that followed made the lobby even more tense. Guests shifted uneasily, their earlier smirks fading as they realized the conversation was turning into something far bigger than a hotel booking. Manny tilted his head slightly, his smile kind but piercing. "What if I told you I didn't come here just to stay in a room? What if I came to see how people treat strangers, people they don't recognize?" His words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples across the lobby. The businessman who mocked him earlier avoided eye contact now. The laughter was gone. For the audience watching on YouTube, this was the moment of deep engagement. The story had shifted from a simple insult into a moral test. Manny was asking questions not just to the staff, but to everyone watching the video. If you were in Manny's place right now, how would you respond? Would you stay silent, walk away, or ask the questions that matter? Tell us in the comments. Back in the lobby, the receptionist finally stammered. "Sir, I didn't mean to offend you. We have certain expectations here." Manny nodded again, his expression gentle. "I understand. Expectations are important, but so is respect. It costs nothing, yet it means everything." The housekeeper, unable to hold back anymore, whispered to another staff member, "That's Manny Pacquiao, the senator, the champion." And in that moment, the story was about to shift even further. The quiet questions of one humble man were slowly peeling back the arrogance of an entire room. What no one knew yet was that Manny's true response, the decision he was about to make, would leave everyone in that hotel speechless. The whisper spread quickly across the lobby. "That's Manny Pacquiao," the housekeeper repeated, her voice barely above a breath. Some staff frowned in disbelief. The receptionist's eyes widened, their confidence cracking. A few guests leaned closer, trying to confirm. Was it really him? But while the room buzzed with confusion, Manny remained still, his expression calm. He glanced toward the housekeeper and gave her a gentle nod, almost as if he was silently thanking her for recognizing him. Then, almost naturally, the atmosphere began to shift into something more personal. Manny leaned against the counter and, instead of boasting about who he was, he began to share something much deeper. "You know," he said softly, addressing no one in particular, "when I was a child, I didn't have the luxury of hotels. Some nights I didn't even have a bed." The room grew quiet. Even those who had been mocking him earlier found themselves listening. "I grew up in General Santos. My family was very poor. My mother worked as hard as she could, but there were days when food was scarce. I remember selling bread and donuts on the street just to help. Sometimes I would sleep on cardboard boxes. At that time, the world didn't see me as special. People looked at me the way you looked at me tonight, like I didn't belong." His words hung heavy in the air, carrying the weight of memory and pain. "But even then," Manny continued, "I smiled, because I believed life had something better waiting. I believed that if I worked hard, prayed hard, and respected people no matter how they treated me, one day, things would change." A murmur moved through the lobby. The businessman who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The receptionist looked down at the desk, ashamed. Manny's eyes grew distant for a moment, as if he was reliving those early struggles. The smell of the streets, the ache of hunger, the sting of rejection. But then he straightened, his voice firm yet gentle. "I started boxing because it was the only way to survive. I trained barefoot, with torn gloves, in small gyms where no one expected me to succeed. People mocked me. They told me I was too small, too poor, too weak. But every punch I threw in that ring was more than just a punch. It was a fight for my family, for dignity, for respect." The housekeeper had stopped working now, tears brimming in her eyes. A few guests put their phones down, drawn into the raw honesty of the moment. And then, Manny said, smiling faintly, the world noticed. Little by little, victories came. But the truth is, even after becoming a champion, even after being elected as a senator, I never forgot how it felt to be invisible, to be judged by appearance, to be treated as less. He paused, letting the silence fill the lobby. The chandelier lights reflected softly off his face, highlighting not a celebrity, but a man who had lived through suffering. "That's why I ask the questions I do," Manny continued. "Because wealth is not measured in money. Real wealth is measured in kindness, in how you treat the person standing in front of you, whether you know their name or not." The words pierced through the arrogance that had clouded the lobby minutes earlier. Suddenly, the hotel didn't feel as glamorous. The marble floors, the velvet sofas, the shining chandeliers, they all seemed smaller compared to the enormity of the story being told. For the audience watching this unfold on YouTube, this was the moment hearts began to soften. Manny's humility and struggle weren't just inspiring, they were relatable. Because everyone has felt judged, everyone has faced doubt, everyone has been underestimated, and in Manny's story, they saw their own. The receptionist's hands trembled slightly as they clutched the counter. They had insulted not just a world champion, but a man who knew suffering more deeply than they could imagine. The lobby had gone silent now. Even the faint background music seemed to fade. All that remained was Manny's presence. Simple, humble, yet overwhelming. And though no one knew it yet, this backstory was only setting the stage. Because the truth about Manny Pacquiao, and the decision he was about to make, would leave the entire hotel stunned. The silence in the lobby felt heavy, almost suffocating. Manny's words about his childhood and struggle lingered in the air like an echo no one could escape. People looked at him differently now, not just as a simple man in worn sneakers, but as someone who carried a story far greater than the chandeliers and marble floors surrounding them. The housekeeper, wiping her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, finally spoke louder this time. He's not just anyone. He's Manny Pacquiao, the people's champ, a senator, and one of the greatest boxers who ever lived. The sentence cut through the room like thunder. Guests gasped audibly. Heads turned. The businessman who had laughed earlier froze, his face draining of color. A woman near the elevator dropped her phone in shock. The receptionist stammered, their lips parting but no words coming out. The arrogance that had filled their voice minutes earlier was gone, replaced with disbelief and fear. Whispers rushed across the lobby like wildfire. Wait, that's him? The world champion? How did we not recognize him? A bellboy hurried forward, his eyes wide. It's true. I've seen him on posters, on TV. That's really Manny Pacquiao. The crowd's tone shifted in an instant. Moments ago, laughter and ridicule had filled the air. Now it was awe, shame, and regret. The manager, who had just stepped out from a back office, rushed over after hearing the commotion. His eyes widened when he saw who was standing at the counter. He quickly bowed his head. Senator Pacquiao, my deepest apologies, if my staff. But Manny gently raised his hand, stopping him mid-sentence. His face was calm, his voice steady. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I only wanted to see how people are treated when they don't wear a suit or arrive in a fancy car. The words hit harder than any punch could. Guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing how quickly they had judged him, how easily they had laughed along. A woman whispered to her husband, "We mocked him, and he's the same man who built homes for the poor." Another guest added, "He donated millions after every disaster, and we doubted his worth because of his shoes." The shame spread like a shadow across the room. The receptionist finally found their voice, though it trembled. "Sir, I didn't mean to disrespect you. I didn't realize who you were." Manny's eyes softened, but his reply was firm. "That's the problem. Respect should not depend on recognition. It should be given to everyone, whether you know their name or not." The lobby grew even quieter. Some guests lowered their heads. Others nodded slowly, acknowledging the painful truth in his words. Then Manny turned toward the manager. "Tell me," he asked calmly, "how do you train your staff to treat strangers? Do you only teach them to smile at people who look rich? Or do you remind them that kindness costs nothing?" The manager had no answer. His lips pressed tightly together, sweat forming on his forehead. The crowd, however, reacted. A young bellboy whispered to another, "He's right. Sometimes we forget, sometimes we judge too quickly." A guest shook his head, muttering, "We should all be ashamed. He's teaching us more than any classroom ever could." The truth was out now, laid bare for everyone to see. The man they had ridiculed wasn't just rich, famous, or powerful. He was living proof that dignity, humility, and respect outweigh any suit or luxury car. And in that moment, Manny Pacquiao had already made up his mind. He wouldn't yell, he wouldn't seek revenge. Instead, he was preparing to make a decision that would transform the arrogance of that lobby into a story of justice and inspiration. The whispers died down. Every eye was fixed on him. Every heart beat faster, waiting for his next move, because the truth had been revealed. And now everyone was desperate to see what Manny Pacquiao would do next. The lobby was frozen in silence. Dozens of eyes were locked on Manny, waiting for his reaction. The same man they had laughed at a few minutes ago now held the entire room in the palm of his hand. The manager cleared his throat nervously. "Senator, Pacquiao, please, allow me to correct this mistake. We will provide you with the best suite, complimentary." Manny lifted his hand gently. "No, I'm not here for a free room. I don't need special treatment." His tone was calm, but his next words carried the weight of a thunderclap. "I'll buy the hotel." Gasps erupted across the lobby. A guest dropped his coffee cup, shattering it on the floor. The receptionist's mouth fell open, too stunned to even breathe. The manager blinked rapidly, unsure if he had heard correctly. Sir, buy the hotel?" Manny nodded once firmly. "Yes, this place, I'll take it." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. The same people who had smirked, whispered, and mocked him were now speechless, staring at him with wide eyes. And Manny continued, his voice steady, his words deliberate. "But listen carefully. I'm not buying this place to humiliate anyone. I'm buying it to make sure no one is ever treated the way I was treated tonight." The receptionist's face turned pale. Their hands trembled as they clutched the desk, the reality sinking in. This wasn't just about losing face, this was about watching their arrogance collapse in front of everyone. The businessman who had mocked Manny earlier buried his face in his hands. The woman who laughed at his sneakers couldn't meet his gaze. Meanwhile, the housekeeper who had recognized him wiped away fresh tears. She stepped forward, whispering, "Sir, thank you. No one has ever spoken for us like this." Manny smiled softly at her, then turned to the room at large. Too often, people look at clothes, at shoes, at appearances, and they decide someone's worth. But what about respect? What about kindness? Those are the things that truly make a place great. The crowd was silent, listening, some nodding, some hanging their heads in shame. "This hotel," Manny continued, "will not just be a place of luxury. It will be a place of dignity. Whether someone walks in wearing a suit or wearing slippers, they will be treated the same." The manager, still stunned, stammered, "Sir, we would be honored if you truly meant this." Manny looked around the lobby one last time. His gaze swept over the chandeliers, the marble, the staff, the guests, the whole scene that had judged him moments ago. And with calm authority he said, "I mean every word." The transformation was complete. The staff who once looked down on him now looked up with awe. The arrogant receptionist was near tears, whispering apologies that could barely be heard. Guests murmured among themselves, realizing they had just witnessed a lesson they would never forget. In that moment, Manny wasn't just a boxer, a senator, or a wealthy man. He was a symbol of humility and justice, someone who didn't just talk about respect but demanded it through action. The lobby, once filled with arrogance and laughter, was now heavy with reflection and respect. The lobby, which only minutes ago was filled with smirks, whispers, and arrogance, now stood in stunned silence. Every eye followed Manny as he calmly stepped away from the counter. The weight of his words, "I'll buy the hotel," still hung in the air. The receptionist who had insulted him first finally spoke, their voice trembling. "Sir, I am so sorry. I didn't know who you were. Please, forgive me." Manny turned back, his eyes gentle but firm. "It's not about knowing who I am. It's about knowing who you are when you face a stranger. Respect should not depend on recognition. You didn't have to know my name to treat me kindly." The words struck harder than any scolding could. The receptionist's shoulders sank, tears welling up in their eyes. The businessman who had mocked Manny earlier stepped forward too, his voice low and regretful. "I judged you by your shoes. And I was wrong. Forgive me." Manny didn't respond with anger. Instead, he offered a small smile. "We all make mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them." The crowd murmured in agreement. Heads nodded. The arrogance that had filled the air earlier had vanished, replaced with humility and reflection. Then Manny turned to the housekeeper, the one who had recognized him first. She stood there nervously, unsure whether she should speak. Manny walked over, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for reminding everyone who I was," he said softly. "But more importantly, thank you for treating me with respect before you even knew my name." Tears rolled down her cheeks. For her, this wasn't just about fame or recognition. It was about dignity. The kind that Manny had just restored in the hearts of everyone present. Finally, Manny looked around the entire lobby one last time. His voice carried through the room with the quiet strength of a champion. "Remember this. Money fades, fame fades, titles fade. But respect, that lasts forever. Treat every person with dignity, because you never know the battles they've fought to stand where they are." The silence that followed was not awkward anymore. It was powerful. Guests clapped softly, some with tears in their eyes. Even the manager bowed deeply, promising change. Manny smiled, gave a small wave, and walked out of the hotel the same way he had walked in simple clothes, with quiet steps, and a humble heart. But this time, everyone in that lobby knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because your story matters too. Respect, kindness, and humility cost nothing, but they can change everything.